Hello and welcome. Seeing a lot of familiar faces out there. I have my fabulous panel out here. My name is Lori Hammel, and I'm super excited about tonight because we're going to be talking about polishing, getting your scripts to where you want them to be. And I think the best way to do that is bring in people that do it all the time. That are dedicated to it. I know for me, there's a part of me, I'm like, it's done. I did that much. I don't want to have to keep going. And so what I'm looking at is being inspired as well about going back in and finding things that can just tweak it that much more. Because the place to do it is on the page before we get into later part of this series, which is going to be in producing and filming and getting it up there. And as actors, we have somebody else that's taking care of all of that before we ever arrive on set, right? So we're finding out these secrets as we go along of how you can make your script the best it possibly can be. And I'm just so thrilled to have our panelists here tonight. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and Diana, if you would please be so kind to start. Introduce yourself, and also, what inspired you to start writing? A character or a story or an event that happened in your life when you found yourself writing. Diana?
Thank you very much. My name is Diana Amsterdam.
Oh, can you use a mic?
My name is Diana Amsterdam. Is that projecting?
Can everyone hear? Okay.
Okay, great. I am a working playwright and screenwriter, and I'm also a script and story consultant. And I work with people both in the industry and with civilians and with many actors. I've consulted on a whole lot of short films that have gone out and become part of festivals and won awards. And I'm very well acquainted with what you all are dealing with in trying to create a short script for yourself. Before I get into what started me off on my writing career, which I'm totally obsessed with, as I think one has to be, I just want to say that it's really brave of you all to decide that you're going to put yourself forward, showcase yourself, and feature yourself in a film. And I just want to start out by saying it's a great decision to do that, because we all know what actors are up against. And it's not easy. And just getting people to look at you can be very, very, very hard. I have a tack-up note right now on my computer that says, get eyes on it. And that simply means to get people to look at my work. And I think that's what you all need as well. So to go back to our question about what got me started, I have to admit that it was very personal. And I started out writing when I was heartbroken and betrayed by a best girlfriend. And after that, I wrote about that for about 10 years. So I think you understand. I think that I've done an awful lot of coaching and teaching and mentoring. And I have come to understand that for many new writers, writing is cathartic. Writing is something that we do in order to work through something personal. And when you are told to write what you know, it's a little deeper than that, isn't it? It's really not only writing what you know, it's writing what you need to write about. Because writing can be very, very therapeutic. And if you start from that place where there's passion in what you're writing, you're going to have a good handle on it. So I know that all of you have already started a first draft. Is that correct? Okay. So you're already into your first draft. And given that you're already into your first draft, I don't know how much revision you're willing to do, but I'm going to start out by saying there has never been an excellent first draft. A first draft is really just a basic blueprint, if I may, for what you want to eventually put down on the page. So to get back to what got me started writing, this personal catharsis was really so important for me. I had to work out what had happened to me. And I named the two characters, two women. One was based on me and one on my best girlfriend who had betrayed me. And I wrote about the two of us for years and years and years, seriously. I never really worked it through, unfortunately, but it did really help. But then in addition to that, I started finding that I was writing about things that were important for me to not only to work through personally, but to bring to the world, to offer something that I personally could add. I'm not a political writer. I'm an existential writer, which means that I write about the human condition. It's a little different than writing about political subjects. But right now we're in a time where we all need to dig deep and really write about things that are really, really important to us. So one of my plays, called Carnival Round the Central Figure, is based on the fact that I was in the room with a cousin when he died, and all around him was small talk and mediocrity and triviality and people that were avoiding the subject of what was really, really going on, and unable to face it. And so you can see that that was both something personal and also something that I needed to present to the world in terms of what can we say about subjects that have meant a lot to us personally, but might also relate to the rest of the world. So is that sufficient?
That sounds great. Thank you. Caytha?
Well, I'm glad I didn't sit in the first spot.
Would you like Susan?
Well, I was
to
going to
go
say
first?
everything she said, but since she said it, I'll keep it super brief. So my name's Caytha, and Caytha, and I have tuberculosis. No, I'm just kidding, because I kind of had this horrible virus and told people at this wedding this weekend I had tuberculosis and that it would be my last day. But I'm here. So in any case, yeah, I mean, here to talk about a lot of those same things, not quite saying it as profoundly and beautifully, but I'm a writer, producer, and I always really called myself a storyteller, which is kind of what we're talking about in this larger space. Because I'm also like the writing thing, you're like kind of alone a lot, and I'm not very good at being alone. So then I kind of worked in sales, and I'm like, oh, that's storytelling too. And as an independent filmmaker, you know, I was always like, oh, you write the script, which is the blueprint, you make it, then you go in the stuff you'll learn in post. You know, and again, when you bring in the actors and then they embody these people that were in your head, and the story keeps being told many times. So like, that's why I looked at myself as a storyteller, because to the hyphenates, like I do every job, including equipment driver and PA and all those other jobs. But in any case, so yeah, I started writing in second grade, actually, when I could start writing. And we had this thing called writer's theater in my class, and I just had all these stories to tell. And kind of similarly, that, you know, I would just kind of look at the human condition and life and going, oh, that's kind of funny, or let me, you know, what's going on here? And, you know, usually with a little humorous, even though it was always very tragic, you know, humorous slant. And so, yeah, I did start writing in second grade. And, you know, I've kind of done that as well as these other sides. So, you know, I think there's this fearlessness to it. And it's really, really hard. And that's what, you know, it's not an easy thing to do, nor is any of these jobs in the arts. But, you know, it really does take, you know, it's this treasure. Like, to me, it's always this puzzle you have to solve. Like, you have this idea of what the story is, and then figuring out how to tell it and who they are and making all these choices. And it's this process that we're going to get into when you ask more questions on how to get it when you feel like it's, quote, done, and it never is. But so, yeah, looking to talk about that, sharing what I can with all of you to help you guys. I jokingly say, what advice can you give to people? And it's like, change your major when I talk to the college students. But I'm joking, because it's like, if you've got, which you guys have as actors, what we all have to deal with as artists, as writers, as actors, because we literally are the most vulnerable people in this industry. It's like, if you have that beast inside of you, like, you just have to free that beast. And so I feel like we're the same thing, like, as the people that everybody's like, oh, yeah, because, you know, we're, you know, the writers, the actors, like, they're the least important people. So, you know, but we really know we are the most important people. So, and that's all I have to say now.
Thanks, Caytha. Susan?
See if this is on. Is this on? Okay, thing that inspired me to write and become a writer. Actually, you. Actors. And what I saw, I mean, aside from completely ripping off a Nancy Drew book to write my own version of a novel, a detective novel. Aside from that, it was really because I became a playwright. When I sat with my mother on a bus trip from Pennsylvania, where I grew up in a little town in Pennsylvania, come to New York and saw West Side Story. That was it. I was totally smitten with theater, and therefore, as a writer, I was able to marry the two. I wanted to write with actors. And I also was very moved and thrilled by people actually getting up in front of other people and saying things. And I wanted to be the one to give them the words to say, I guess. And actually a turning point, I had been well into my career, but as an example of how much that has affected me, I woke up one day and thought, after seeing a performer actually, he performed his own material. He was an actor, but he wrote this for himself. And I thought, you know, I'm the one ultimately that is going to be blamed, maligned, congratulated, adored, all of those things. It will be on me. And I did have something to that I felt that I could directly come to the audience to say and to do. And so I wrote a play, a one-woman play called My Left Breast. That's 20 years ago that I wrote it. It's been done a lot since, but I learned so much about the craft, my craft and your craft, because you are the conduit. And so for those of you who want to take charge of your lives and of the material that you get to do, it's an incredible thing. Then we could both be in each other's shoes in a way. But every time that I stood outside, I mean, before I got on stage and was almost sick, I said, how do you do it? How do you do this? It wasn't what people said, oh, you're really courageous to go out there and tell your story. No. It wasn't the writing part. It was the part where I put them both together. And I gather that that's, what we're going to talk about today. And, you can read my bio, and rather than announce to you all the things that I do or say or want or have gone through, I'd like to react to the questions you have and the thoughts you have and be of a help in that way. So.
That's great. Thank you so much, Susan. What we will be doing, as Melissa said earlier, is that if you have questions as we're going through today, talking about the different subjects that we'll be covering, if you have questions, we'll have a time and Melissa will be picking up the question sheets again. So if something comes up while we're talking, please feel free to write that down and the cards will be collected. One of the things that I'm wondering about is just sort of getting started with rewrites, because like I said earlier, there's a part of me, I just want to be done. I don't want to have to go back in. So what I'd like to is just like starting really basic with how you organize yourself with your thoughts, because just even looking at something that you've been working on, and we're talking about doing shorts, about the 10 minutes at the most with the credits. So you wrote something, and now looking at it yet again, how do you, and what kind of tips would you give us for organizing yourself? How do you do it when you've done the first draft and now let's go back in? And please feel free, panelists, to talk. If someone has an idea, go ahead and chime in as well with the conversation. So who would like to start with that? What do you do? How do you organize yourself? What can we do as actors sitting down with the dreaded first draft, needing to go to the next step?
Well, yeah, I'm saying for me, that's when you're going out to other people, because you write it and you're kind of living with it. And that, I'm just saying for me, because you're in it. There are some interesting books. Like there's a great, what's her name? Linda, what was her name? Who has that great rewrite book where there's this, oh God, what's her name? It's this terrific book, which is all about rewriting, where it challenges you with, all that sort of checklist. Did you do this? And going through that whole process. And there may many, many screenwriting books. So in terms of from your own first step to doing it, but to me, that's when you find the trusted person, and it is the trusted person to sort of read it and give it notes, or start doing readings, which are before you're producing it, readings where you hear it.
I totally agree with Susan here. I think it's really sorry. It's really important to bring it out of the page as soon as you possibly can. When you are writing it and you're all alone with it, as Caytha has said, writing is a very private, and we do it alone a lot. But if you can find a way to bring it out, if you can say it out loud, just say it to yourself. If you don't have somebody that you want to, to really expose it to yet, that can be very vulnerabilizing. But that is definitely a great next thing to do. I was just talking with a writer that I'm working with yesterday, and there was a piece of his writing that he was not sure about, and I advised him to get together with some friends and just read it out loud.
Just to, because I wrote and produced and co-created a web series called Anyone But Me, which, if you haven't heard of, bad on you. but it has over 50 million views worldwide. And when I started, and it was obviously the short form. And so one of the things that I always felt about the short form started before you get to the second draft, and that is be merciless, because you have only so much time to present your character, to begin your story, so I always feel like you have to compress or pack a lot into every sentence that you have. In other words, let's not spend too much time saying, hello, how are you? This is a nice day, kind of thing.
Or the exposition.
Exactly. You have to be clever about that. And also, because you're actors, you know this. When you get after your first draft and you are going to rewrite, and all of these things are true, you want to hear it, of course. But you have to first say then, do I believe in that person? Do I believe in this situation that I've set up here? Is this cliched? Is this something I've heard before? And to go through your work and say, wait a minute, there's a lot of competition out there. How do I stand out? How does my piece, my film, my web episode, my play make it through all of this? And that's where I think when you get to your second draft and you rewrite, because I think you should write down everything you want to write down, although I don't do that, by the way. I rewrite as I'm writing. I'm not fast because of that. But to continue on that just for the moment, so when you get to your second draft, that's when you have to ask, if you haven't already, these questions. Who's this for? Am I being true to what I want to convey? Have I heard this all before? And try to break through that. And that takes a little
of what you're saying, Susan. I'm sorry.
I just wasn't finished.
Sorry.
That takes a certain amount of courage, actually, guts to do.
Just to support what she is saying, as a guideline, there's no small talk in dramatic writing. So if you look, especially when you're only writing 10 pages, you really have to go back and look at it. People don't say hello, how are you doing, any of that kind of stuff. Just take it out. You don't really have room for it. When you're writing 10-page piece, you really have to cut to the bone. Every single line, as Susan was saying, has to be essential. So that might be one place to look. Just go back and read it over and see if you start out with small talk, if you have conversation. The conversation in a piece, in a 10-minute piece, needs to be very strongly directed towards something. So it can't just be chatting, if that makes sense.
Well, it's got to propel the story.
Thank you. So when you go back and look at it, if you find that you're not feeling a marrow, a bone, a spine, as soon as you get into 10 pages by page 2, we have to know what it is that somebody in your piece cares about. And I would say that that's probably the most important thing that I can convey tonight, is that somebody in your piece, and it's going to be you probably because you're going to be writing this for yourself, I think, needs to desperately care about something and want something. So going back into your second draft and looking at what you wrote, if nobody cares, if nobody needs anything by a 10-minute piece, on page 2 by page 2, look and see if there's a desire on that page. And if there isn't, see where it is, because I'm sure it is going to be in there somewhere. Bring it to the front.
Yeah, and I think, again, what you're sort of articulating is that sort of hero's journey and basically taking, and again, there's many shorts that, I write in a very sort of to a structure, this 3-act structure, which I think, there's, I'm watching The Florida Project, which is a really interesting film, but I don't write that way. So if we're talking about more in a classic sense, you're taking what's this typical 3-act structure, and you're saying like page 2 is the end of first act, so to speak,
right.
where it's like setting it up. And I think the test is to what everybody, we're all saying is on one level, when you're finished it, like how are you going to articulate what your short is about? Because that goes, which is, it's like, what is the story I'm telling, what it's about, and that's your sort of, what's driving it. And if it's not easy to sort of explain,
Thank you.
like make it sure it's clear to
Right.
you what it's about, so you have that sort of, and understand, what you probably learned before about this sort of structure of how, and everything is moving towards the goal of this short. Like everything is propelling the story. And the other thing, which is really hard to sort of talk about within this way, especially I'm not a screenwriting teacher per se, but how, and that's why with what you guys, with your ability to actually be trained in reading dialogue, there's the character story we're talking about and the dialogue, and what makes the great writers great, it's basically how characters don't really say literally on the nose what they mean. And that's where it is, where you turning it to make it, so the first draft, they might be kind of literally saying what you want them to say to propel the story. And then when you kind of go back in, it's a little bit of looking at, okay, is there another way I can craft this scene? Now, let's say we have the structure in place. Is there a more interesting way that I can compel what this scene is about and either say it, have my characters play it differently? And that's where I think with what you do, you could create your own little scene study within your short where you flip it, or what if I'm that person instead of the one that's me? Where am I in this scene? So I think as actors, you come with a lot of things that us as experienced writers don't have, this ability to become these characters better. And then again, if you're starting to read the other person's line and saying, wait, have I really thought why they're in that scene? It helps this checks and balances.
All those things are absolutely right on. I was just thinking about also, I have to just say this. So we individuate our, that's not even a word. So I'm not a writer. Don't call me a writer. I can't speak so good. But I was thinking about, I don't follow, I don't read writing books. I've been doing this a long time, and I have certain instincts, and I've learned certain lessons in both doing film, television, web series, and stage. But I was thinking about a film. Eric Stoltz and Lily Tomlin did a reading of a play of mine as a benefit for autism. And afterwards, Eric came up to me because he was starting to direct. And he said, "How would you feel? I'd like to turn this into a short film." I said, "Yes, why, of course." And he did. He raised some money, and he did it. And of course, I adapted my play for the screen. It was a bit longer than maybe what some of you are writing. I mean, it was probably started out to be 18 minutes, and it had to get down. And actually, a scene he asked me to write because he wanted to expand it a bit, which I did, was ultimately cut. Which was interesting. But I learned a lot too about, because some of you are writing film, some of you might be writing a short web series, a play, but in this case, this was film. And so I was learning too about character. The characters in the story can also be very visual, you know, and you can have a moment like that says it better than a living person can. And so those are things that, you know, of course you'll take into consideration and know more about than other people behind the camera or, you know, dealing with the page. But I think the word propel is interesting here, I think. Propel, not just in terms of plot, because I don't think, I mean, especially now, what does plot mean? I think a lot of you may be writing something that isn't really discernible as traditional plot, and yet you still owe, you know, the viewer something that transforms, that moves them or amuses them or entertains them, and that does take that kind of forward motion.
But yeah, because I just want to, because again, like I said, I tend to write, like saying my thing is my style. But I do think with kind of piggybacking what you're saying, because we haven't really talked about character. We've talked about dialogue, we talked about story. But again, if you could create, and especially, you know, with why you have 50 million people, is that you've created these characters that people, like they became real and people identified with. And especially when you do things that you have as independent filmmakers and theater people, like you really have more of a personal relationship with your audience, so you kind of understand their experience. And the thing that was very interesting is when they identify with a character differently than you thought, because they see themselves there, and that's an interesting thing. You're like, oh, but the thing is, you need to create these, like, and that's where you can probably in 10 minutes not be like, you want to compel, like something has to potentially happen, but it can be a character study. And so that is what it's about. It's like, I want to understand something, and I want my audience to become so intrigued by this person. So it's maybe not like, so I'm not saying it has to be so high concepty, but there is something, and that's why I think this character study, creating this compelling, complex character, is equally something that can compel.
I think something so important for everybody here is, as you know, to follow up on what Caytha is saying, because aren't you writing this for yourselves? I mean, this is a showcase for each of you, isn't it? I assume it's a 10-minute piece that you're going to star in, aren't you? Featuring yourselves? Yeah. Okay. And since that's true, I would say, spend a little time, you know, going back over what you've heard from casting directors and people who've seen your work. When have you gotten praise? When have people said, I loved how you did that? You know, when you created a character from another person's writing that was really amazing, that people related to and really, really praised you for. Because I think it's so important with this 10 minutes to really bring forth who you can be, that is the best that you can be. Recently I was working with a writer, and she spoke many languages. She can speak many languages, and she was advised that she should write a short piece in which she was able to speak, in which she could show her bilingual abilities. And I think that's a perfect example. If you have a skill, if there's something that you've been noticed for, bring it forth in your piece. I mean, if this were the kind of room where we could go around and ask everybody, maybe you could articulate what it is that you've heard has been special about you and bring that forth in your piece as a character study.
You know, what's interesting in addition to that, which is great advice, is that, once you I want to say put a pen to paper. No one does that anymore. But, whatever your implement is. That it's an opportunity for that, yes, for showcase for yourself. But you have to know, Caytha and I were just talking about this actually, why you're writing what you're writing. Is it to get a part? Is it to showcase? I mean, it could be all these things, but it is important to know. Is it because you don't have a chance to have your voice? You're going in for auditions and it's someone else's material and maybe you're right for it, maybe you're not right for it. But here's a piece that may be, surprisingly or not, accessible and then available to other people to do or to do with you. So it exists no matter what you started out thinking. It will exist on its own, as a piece, as something apart from you. Not that it shouldn't mean everything to you. Of course it should. But to know what your ultimate goal is, and it might surprise you to learn that the goal is actually bigger, than you thought when you started.
Well, and also not to take anything away from the acting experience, but you look at Lady Bird right now, you have Greta Gerwig, who's, was a very accomplished actress. And so for many of you, this is an opportunity to take what you know as an actor and become a writer or a director. So, this is a great way to explore just another, part of this industry.
And so getting back to, I love everything that you're saying. And I feel like it's just so resonating as an actor because I really appreciate you highlighting what we already have going for us, right? Because it's going into another part of the whole production to put yourself as the creator of it. And so I love all of the encouragement that you're talking about of what's already going for us. So when we sit down and it's time for rewrites, could you talk a little bit about your actual process of it? So there's this idea, do I delete what's not working? Do you save it for later? Or does it just become overwhelming? And I know your experience will probably be different for all three of you in terms of how you go about that. But let's just say that tonight, for our viewers at home too, as they're watching, that you sit down, you say, okay, I've done this. Now what do I do? Do you actually delete things that aren't going to be working? Do you save them for later? Where do you start with this organization?
Well, with such a short piece, I would say you need to be brutal. And my rule is for myself and also for the many writers that I work with, if you can cut it, cut it. And, it's kind of a very simple rule. You're not going to lose anything because you can take it, and put it at the back. You can just take it and cut it and then copy it at the end of your document so you can save it. But if you can cut it, cut it. Then go back and look at it and see if you lost anything that you really needed. Because sometimes you won't remember as you're writing what it was that made your character say a certain passage. But as you take it out, you'll be missing something in it. So then you can look at it and put that back in. But the rule for me, and I think it's really important because a lot of writing is just, especially with 10 pages, needs to be lean. If you can cut it, do cut it. That's what I do with my own personal rewrites.
But specifically to that, I save all drafts. So I will, I'll write my draft and then, I do the it's because sometimes to that, for me, sometimes I might go in, especially because I'm it's something I don't like. And then maybe later I'm oh, wait, I overcut or something like that. I'm just talking in this large, specifically to, not to what exactly you're doing, but I do save all my drafts. And again, because lots of times you are reacting to notes. And that's another thing that's really so important is that lots of times if you're getting notes because you're showing, first of all, most of the time when you finish something, we all are dying to show it to somebody because it's oh my God, I love it, I wrote it, it's a good, it's a bad, and you want to show, because it is, you're not writing it for yourself, that's a diary, and no, there's no such thing as that because everybody's got a blog now, so there's no such thing as a private diary anymore, but so I feel the first thing is to share it with somebody. Do you like it? The problem is lots of times it's really, really important, and that's what I'm saying is in my process, is finding, because when you're earlier in your writing career, when you might be in writers groups, you might be in these things, and all of a sudden people are telling you how they would do it, not necessarily how it would be better. And
Could you
again,
please repeat that one more time? Because I think we need to hear that. Could you say that one
well,
more time?
that's what I'm just saying is lots of times you share with them, and whether they literally say it on the nose, their notes can be how they would do it, which isn't necessarily the right way, because all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, that character's weak. I think you should make him this, and I think you should. And it's not necessarily it's right or wrong. It's just how they would do it. And so, but sometimes, so you start reactively doing your rewrite lots of times. And that's just part of it where you're doing this reactive rewrite. And that's why it's really important to keep these drafts and also realize, and that's what I always say too in my things where I'm talking about the larger thing about production. Like I'm always like, we're all so eager to get into production. We can shoot on our phones. We can shoot high quality very inexpensively. But I'm always like, the thing that you can control that is the cheapest thing ever is the script. So do not ever rush into production, rush into anything, whether it's a great idea or not. Make sure it's as done as it can be. Because as we know, when you do bring the actors and you are in rehearsals, it does change again because that's that next rewrite. But we're talking about the first rewrite. And so I do save drafts. I do try to find people that I believe are good at giving notes as best you can. And also the other thing that's very consistent, especially on these writing, well, like when you can do that, if 5 people say it, then it's probably true. But if one person says it, you might want to trust your gut sometimes. So there is a whole thing you learn on how you use outside people and how you use this feedback to improve your writing. And also, even if it's your own internal feedback where you can't stand something, that's where I save it, because maybe the thing you cut and in the moment, and that's what you did say, all of a sudden it may belong back or belong differently, and you want to be able to at least go to that.
I think you're at a stage where you have to be both merciless with yourself and very protective of yourselves. I think the first draft is a precious thing. Not precious in that, oh my God, I'm going to put this out there, but in that you have to own it, and you're not ready to own it after that. I mean, maybe there will come the right time when you want to share it with somebody or have it read out loud, but you can keep that time at bay until you feel like that's a draft I want to show. You shouldn't be rushing through it. I mean, the idea, I'm very close to this process of cutting and revising and everything now because I have a play running and it just opened 2 weeks ago. And so I've been, and it doesn't matter. It's a full-length play, but it could be 5 minutes. I mean, the process, once other people get into it with you, that's all I can say. But all of these things are important because it's not just the dialogue in your revision. I mean, maybe I already said this, but you'll just bear with me. That revision has to also do with both, are you moving somewhere, and is the character true to the way you want that character to be? Is that how this character would speak, or that character? Is this a conversation? Is this the right conversation these people are having? Or is there something more important that they have with each other, So those are, and there are many more things to add to that list, but I think you should take those into account as well as the actual words.
And speaking to that, Susan, you mentioned earlier about working with the imagery that is in your short. I would really love to hear, if you would, ladies, talk about how you decide as you're going back through in doing your rewriting, what moments could be visual instead of needing to be spoken through dialogue? Is there, or do you have any tips or tricks? Well, I don't know, tricks. I don't know if I want to say tricks. I think with your experience, are there things that you have found that have been especially helpful in a visual medium?
I think it's so important to remember, if you are, and I think you mostly are writing in a visual medium, that it is visual. And so it might be a great idea to start out with an image. Think of something that belongs in your short play or a screenplay, and put that first. It can be something very, very simple, but do remember, I mean, here's an exercise that might help you. If you can just look at something in your environs that you see every day, just something you look at every single day, and describe it. Just spend a few minutes writing what it looks like. I can't tell you how much this helps visual writers. When you're writing in a visual medium, very often you're imagining what it's going to look like, but that needs to be done on the page. So I would so recommend that. Wherever you have located your piece, just take a minute just to describe it. And you'll find that there's quite a lot to say about that exit sign right there. And it's actually quite visual, isn't it? So if you had that in your piece, if that was the opening shot, you would be seeing something that might already be compelling. So if you have a chance to do that, I very much recommend that. It can help.
And the only thing I want to say, like, on all this is, like, as much as you can, and I believe this, it's, you start, watching as much as you can. That kind of sort of relates to what you're trying to do in general. And just, like, for example, when you talked about that, it made me think of the Three Billboards movie, which is so thematic, and there's so much visual imagery. But I think because, like, I feel like when you're, like, thinking like an actor, you watch movies and TV shows and shorts, and I would look at, like, all these shorts that are in festivals, like the best shorts, if that's what you're going for, and look at, these things, and because you're looking things probably as performers a lot, because we all do. We're looking through, how can I as an actor learn from these actors? And that's the thing, as a writer, lots of time, I mean, I just feel like I want to watch things so I can learn from how a scene is crafted, how they're conveying a message, what is the visual that other people are using. So not that I'm at all copying, but you sort of see it, it helps inform how you're going to do it.
No, absolutely. I mean, you have to see what's out there, and then you can decide to banish it from your mind, or you sometimes, and the other way is fine too, if you have something in your mind and it's clear and you just want to stay, in your imagination, or that's also fine. But whatever helps is really the answer in terms of that. I was also thinking, and as actors, I mean, I know this just from working with actors, but behavior seems to be an important issue. What's my behavior here? And if you have if the director or the writer hasn't given that actor behavior, now it's different on film. It's different on tape when you have the power to cut. But just learning from the stage as well, behavior is part of things. So that's also part of your task, I think, in the writing and in the revision. Have I suggested, or am I leaving that open? Have I given this actor a movement, an action, a visual presence that will say things about him or her, or the environment and the struggles or the interactions that are going on?
The other thing I was going to say is, it's not bad to this practice, and, I'd like to do it more, is doing these sort of writing prompts, because excuse me, you know, lots of times as an actor, you're like, okay, I have this scene. I have to, in my mind, imagine what happened to this character before and who this character is. And so it's not bad for you to actually write stuff that you won't use, but that way when you get, and that's what I'm talking about, this exposition, like lots of times, again, in features and screenwriting, like you might write like what you feel like is the first act, which is all this setup and all this exposition that you end up cutting, and then you start the story. But so it's not bad for you in the rewrite is to sort of go in and get into the character studies. Who is this character? What do I know about him? What is his family history? If I were to put him in therapy, you know, what would he be telling the therapist? And also maybe writing things that won't be in your short, but will help inform what is in your short.
And that sounds somewhat like character study, you know, working on things with backstory and things like that. Things you're already good at, you know, finding the connection to those familiar that familiar territory. So when you're looking into your script, which may be a newer territory, how to apply what you already know in that. Now, I'm also wondering about when you get in a jam. You know, this just not working. If we could have some tips on what you do when you're in the story of your own stories, what you do to get yourself out, you know, this just is not working. Or what I thought is just not happening. It's just, I had it in my mind and it's just not coming out. It's just, what have you done in the past or that you tell other people, help other people with to get out of that?
Sometimes, aside from walking around the reservoir or walking the length and breadth of the city, which I do often, sometimes I just put it aside for a moment and just take these characters, I think, and place them somewhere else. You know, like just try to, what they say, think out of the box, is think out of the frame as well. Think out of the set design that you've given your piece. And just see if that opens things up for you. Because I was also thinking that where you place somebody, if someone's in a coffee shop, I'm not thinking about production costs at the moment because, you know, that'll come. But if someone's in a coffee shop, how they might be or how you might see them differently, and it might help you if you see them somewhere else, just how that might just change things for you. And you know, and then there, of course, is just the angst that does happen. I mean, it just happens. And sometimes it goes in your brain, and a day later, 2 days later, something comes that you never thought of before, or you never let yourself think of before. But I think everybody here must have these, you know, exercises, surely you do, about how to get out of that.
I think if you're having a lot of trouble with a piece and it continues and you're not feeling inspired, it might be a good idea to take a look at it in the whole and see if it's really something, as has been brought up, that you really care about. Because when you really do care about something, you're going to return to it. What Susan was just saying about taking a break is so important. It can really help just to sleep for a couple of days and not write. Because what you will find, and I think this is true for a lot of creative people in all of the arts, is that your subconscious mind is working on your piece when you're not actually doing it consciously, when you're not putting pen to paper. And then when you get back to it, you might find that you have a rush of inspiration that you didn't even know is going to happen. But as I was starting out saying, I've had pieces that I have put aside. There's no shame in that. It's just that I've come to understand that this is not really something that is inspiring me. I'm not getting up in the morning and thinking, oh my God, I've got to work on that. So, but we all do have these problems with writing. And since are mostly new writers, probably writing a 10-minute piece is so hard. So, I would basically just say, try not to be discouraged.
Yeah, no, my thing is I say, like, oh, I drink and I dance when I have writer's block, and it's pretty good.
Well, I just drink, so.
I like the dancing part because I like them both together. It's my and then getting out there. And I can tell you, and then it like sometimes it's like my procrastination is to write something else because I've got a lot of first acts out there. But and it's like sometimes you have these great ideas, but like and I guess sort of in 10 minutes, your dreaded second act is a lot shorter than in a feature, but it's like, I know where it's starting and I know where it's ending. It's like that middle part. But, and there's a lot of ways to get through that. But I have to say a little bit with what you're saying on a very specific thing versus a larger problem, excuse me. Sometimes I'm like, I get stuck in a scene and I'm like, oh, I have a good idea. I'm not going to use it. And then I just go, and I'm just like, it's not working. I'll just avoid it. And I'll just, and sometimes, a lot of the times, the scenes that I can't work, and I'll be working, because I do work with, I like the sounding board. So I do work with a lot of writing, people like you, like where I've got to talk this out. And it's like fixing a scene. I'm like, oh, wait, maybe I just won't use this scene. And it usually isn't missed. So sometimes the thing that isn't working, you don't necessarily need. So that's another thing or move along. Because lots of times, I go forward, I go backwards, I go forward, I go backwards, I go forward, I go backwards. And lots of times there is that thing where I'm like, and I'll go around that and I'll move ahead. And lots of times when you get to the end, it's when it's easier to figure out what that needs to be.
I'm very much write like that. I rarely write in a linear way. It may come out seeming as if I do, although often it doesn't. But no, I have to go, if I believe in what I have, and after a certain point, then I know that I do, and I just have to be patient, which I am not. But I think that's really a good way to look at something is, okay, I don't, because a lot of writing is problem solving, I think, anyway. And you just can't attack it, when you want to always. And so move on with it. It's, the great thing, I'll just put in a plug for a web series in general, because the great thing is that they have a continuation. And so your goal is to make people want to come back to see it. Writing, and I don't know if this is 10 minutes for you or 15. Is there a particular, I'm sure it runs the gamut.
For this particular, what we've been talking about is 10 minutes.
Okay.
Because there's a SAG film series.
Okay.
And so that's the time limit.
I just wanted to make sure because people were saying it. 10 minutes is, there's a lot you can do in it. But I found that, and I have written 10-minute plays, and I have not written except what was made into that film that Eric did. But I think it is more difficult if you don't, you don't have a second episode that's going to continue that first one. So yeah, and pat yourself on the back or whatever the hell they tell you to do that isn't very useful, but but honestly, give yourself credit for going after this. And no, also I think that if you don't think all the time, this is only 10 minutes. Act 2, I have to have this done. I'm sorry, this is just for me. Act 5, page 5, if I don't have that yet, later on you can look at that and say, maybe I should begin this earlier or later. But I really think you have to take away those boundaries at first.
And I'm wondering too, could everyone here in the audience, if you have a question, go ahead and fill it out on the card, and Melissa will pick it up so that we can make sure to get those questions.
Can you pass a water?
Sure. Here you go. So one of the things I'm wondering about is how to avoid overworking your script. Like, I go back in over and over and over again, and I just can't let go. if you're having that problem where it's just never going to get done because it's never going to be good enough, that's not a lot of fun to be in that space. How do you let go? How do you say, this is where it needs to be for right now, instead of just hammering away at it?
Well, there is a way, it's not unusual at all to overwork a script. So, somebody, I think Susan was saying that first draft is so precious. And one of the reasons the first draft is precious is because it comes from a place that's very spontaneous, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So even though you're going to be reworking your first draft, but there's probably going to be something in that first draft that really kind of came from your heart, your gut, your soul. So I would say to kind of return to that first draft, look at it again. If you start feeling like this has turned to dust and, go back to that first draft, and which is basically what most of you have. Is that correct? At this point, you have a first draft. There's going to be something honest and true in that first draft, and that does make it kind of special. So I would say to go back to that. Keep checking on it.
Yeah, just to reiterate on that too, it's like with the overworking is sometimes you are like basically beating the life out of the thing that you created. So, it's a hard thing to answer because to know when it's done, and I also think it's to a personality type, how you are with that. But you don't want to, and that's where sometimes it's like being reactive to other people and reactive to yourself, that you do kind of lose the forest from the trees.
Actually, going back for a second, because I agree with what you all said, but I was just thinking about cutting, which is the opposite. But when you have a rhythm in your dialogue or a character speaks a certain way, and maybe they speak in paragraphs, there's a rhythm to it that works. If you start messing with it, you could lose what is special about it. I've done that. I've done both ways. And so it's a bit of a trap too. And that mostly comes, I think, when you start getting feedback. So it's just another thing to kind of keep an eye on.
And just something that somebody has said to me that who's my kind of executive producer on my series, is this sort of trusting your gut. And that's, at some point, and that's what I was saying is, if one person says it and you don't agree, but if 5 people say it, then it's when you have to maybe think about it. But, just to everything, it's stay true to that a little bit.
Thanks. Oh, go ahead, Diana. Do you have something else?
I just totally, absolutely want to double down on that. I think that is so important. You really, if you hear the same thing over and over again, you kind of do need to pay attention to it. But also be careful who you trust your work with, because as in everything else in our lives, we have various degrees of confidence. Some writers are extremely confident and others are extremely vulnerable, and only you are really going to know where you fall on that. And for maybe the first 20 years of my writing career, I had a very hard time if anybody said something to me about any piece of my writing not being what they liked. And I would just change things helter-skelter, and a lot of good stuff got lost. I don't do that anymore. But I think it's really important for you to kind of, stay on your gut about what it is that is really going to be important. And while it is important if 5 people do say something, also be careful who those 5 people are. Be sure that you trust them.
Thank you. That's so powerful. And it reminds me of if you were going over a scene that you're going to be doing for an audition and who you would choose to do that with. Feeling into that kind of a thing, because you already know what you're doing in those scenarios and you know the kind of people that you pick. So even though this is turning the focus to writing, I love that idea of being mindful and just really picking people that are going to help you to continue to move forward. And we have some questions from the audience. I want to thank everybody who passed along questions in. Thank you, Melissa. Now, this is to everyone. here on the panel. Could you talk about making conflict stronger with each scene and the entire short?
I would love to speak to that. The way that we have conflict be the strongest it can be, conflict don't just write arguments just for an argument's sake. I'm going to start with that. Conflict comes from something organic in your piece, and that is that you, this character you're going to be creating for yourself, needs something desperately. And the conflict comes because there are obstacles to that. So don't create arguments just because you've been taught or you've heard that you need conflict. You're actors, so you know how important it is to relate to obstacles. You know how important it is to have a direction, to think about what your goal is in a scene, right? So if you keep that in mind as writers, just be sure that the conflict arises from that drive that you've already got down on the page, and who is standing in the way of that. And that's, in a 10-minute play, is just very essential to have an antagonist or obstacles. It can be internal, okay? The obstacles can come from within, but make sure that that's where the conflict arises.
Caytha, Susan?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you said it very well. It's just, it is like usually a lot of times that is the note to raise the stakes, but it's, hard to articulate it in a general sense. And it has to be, like you said, it can't be this artificial conflict. It's got to be really what's driving this story.
Great question.
Okay. All right. So this one is for Diana. Sandy's asking this. How do you, and please, I'd love to hear from the other ladies too. How do you determine which facet of your diamond of a script needs polishing, and what tool or technique do you find most helpful to gain the most perspective?
Well, thank you for that question, Sandy. I would say that because you are developing a voice, because you're actors, and you're going to be finding what it is that you speak and act best. One thing to do, if you want to try to do a little exercise in addition to the 10-minute piece that you're writing, is to write a long monologue for your character. Just take some time doing that. Discover your character's backstory, and after you know that, you can write that down. Write a 1 or 2 page monologue spoken by your character. Doesn't even have to relate to what's happening in your piece. And when you do that, you will have a chance to discover, are there euphemisms that this character says over and over again? Does she or he tend to be funny? I mean, that's something that you might know is a facet that you might want to develop, that you are funny. Is this a character who likes to see the world in terms of facts or sees the world in terms of concepts? So you'll be able to discover a lot about your piece if you just spend that extra time writing that 1 or 2 minutes monologue, and then send that out, because the monologue itself could get published.
All right. And speaking about that, do you need, one of the questions is, do you need a literary agent to shop your script? If not, how do you get in an office to pitch it?
I have a story. No, it really got me my start, and so timing and situation, these things matter almost as much. It's a kind of a catch-22. This whole thing about how you get into an agent's office, you are actually doing the thing that you are making a thing that hopefully will, if not get you into an agent's office, it will get attention for you. That is another reason I love the world of or the internet or the web series, because you can put it on yourself and you can put your film on yourself. That is a way, for sure. Just, I have to tell you this only because it's just so, I was splitting from my husband. I had a little baby. I moved to LA because the Mark Taper Forum was doing a play of mine, and I went to meet with an agent. Well, they didn't care about playwrights then. They do now, but they didn't then. So I really didn't have anything to bring with me. But another agent came rushing through the office to talk to the one I was meeting with, and she was like in a rage. She was going to fire her secretary because her secretary couldn't spell or type or whatever. I said, well, I'm here to get an agent, but I can type. Let me know if you do fire your secretary. Okay, well, she fired her secretary. And I said, and offered me the job as her assistant. And I said, the only caveat would be that you read something of mine, and if you like it, agree to represent me. And the beginning of my film and television career.
All right, but the reality is, like, in the now is very hard. I don't mean that. I think that's a great story.
I thought that was just a little...
No, I'm saying that's a great story.
Of course, in the reality.
No. I don't even mean that. No, I didn't mean it.
Okay,
it wasn't on that. It was
ahead.
not. It was just the next. It really was out of that because I think that's an amazing story. It wasn't at all. I'm just saying right now, as somebody who's been out there, it is very, very hard to get representation these days. So, just because the industry, it's hard. So the thing is, first of all, agents, like, it's mostly, and it's just like talent. It's really managers now more than agents. Agents are deal makers, and they're dealing with much bigger things. So you're trying to get a manager, and they have very short lists, and what do you have that they can make money off of, because they're all working on spec stuff. Unlike casting, where you're dealing in production, everything in literary is development oriented, unless you're trying to get staffed as a writer. Now, if you're trying to get staffed as a writer, that's a whole nother thing, and that goes into what Susan's talking about, creating something that they see has value as a staff writer. And a lot of times it is writing theater, or it is creating this incredibly special web series that shows that you're an episodic writer. But in terms of, it's even harder than in the acting space in representation. So the ways you do it, because you have to increase value. So there are a lot of very, very viable pitching services out there that are worth exploring. There is that whole festival circuit. So if you create a short that is a really, really good short and then can get in, especially into the top tier festivals, that's a way to get recognized. And that's when they kind of come to you.
I mean, that is absolutely true. And remember Neil LaBute, who had been a student of mine at NYU as a playwright. He just put on some of his plays. He'd find a space, he'd rent it, and he'd do it. And then some years following that, he made his own film, and it got him going. And this is what this is for all of you. But I think Caytha is right about festivals or online. And that's then call us back, and we'll talk to you about how to get that going. But I don't think you it's too hard to get one, and I don't think you need one.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. This is the number one question that I get from new writers. It's, how do I get an agent? And I just really say, don't worry about it right now. I mean, it's so hard to get an agent. You really need to have a deal in the works to get an agent. You know, although I do congratulate you, Susan, on that chutzpah. That was amazing.
I was young.
But, you know, it's harder and harder to get an agent, but you're here, right? And this is going to open doors for you. There's a festival right here, isn't there?
That is true.
So, I mean, my goodness, just being here is a huge step that you're taking. I would definitely say to, take advantage of what's right in front of you, and don't worry about the agent for now.
And just, sort of to the agent thing and whatever, when I speak in these kinds of things, mostly towards writers, I'm like, you're a producer until somebody else takes that job away from you. So
Correct.
You have to recognize, and that's what this SAG Foundation is doing for you. It's empowering you, because to sit around and write something and think you can send out some query letter, it just doesn't work that way. There are no development deals like there were. Like, there's a few. It's a very closed world. We know that. So the thing is, the more you empower yourself, the more you put stuff out there. When I got an MFA at UCLA, and they said the best way to get produced is to write more scripts, because then your odds go up. And it's sort of what you're all doing with doing the casting workshops and doing these things and working on student films. It's the similar kind of thing in the writer's world as well, where you just find these ways that are going to get you the exposure, hopefully get something monetized. What we've both have found too, in this new do-it-yourself space, there are ways that you can actually earn money. We've both earned money off of short form content on the web. So you really have to be your own producer. You need to empower yourself. You need to be this hyphenate. And at some point, you know, the cream rises to the top, opportunities happen, and it's just being out there and being relentless and making it happen for yourself.
And just to add to that, when I did the web series, that was a period of time I did not have an agent anymore. That doesn't matter the reasons, but I didn't. And we did this. True, I had experience and I had work that had been done, but that's not what opened doors for us. It was putting on the producer hat. It was going to things like this and panels and not being afraid to walk up to somebody and talk to people. And I think SAG-AFTRA does a wonderful job of opening that door for you.
Wow, that feels great, doesn't it? So, in other words, you're right where you need to be. You are doing the work. We're going to be having more panels about the next steps after this, after the first of the year. So I hope that you'll tune in for that. Now, I really want to thank our panelists. I feel as though they gave us such wonderful insights and ways to work around maybe things that we haven't had to do yet. Because as actors, we're always having to go around this and that and make things work for us. So now as writers as well, these have just been some wonderful tips. If you could please just tell us where we can find you. Also, just to let you know, you can look on, when you're watching this at home, everyone's name will be listed on it, all of our panelists. But I'd also just love to hear from you about what we can look forward to and how we can find you.
Well, I'm very easy to find by Googling, so do that. If you visit my website, there's a lot of tips and teachings on there, and some of those are actually things we've been discussing tonight. So I think you'll find that very helpful.
So I have a production company, Fox Meadow Films, that has a website. I currently, my show, which is called The Other F Word.
Good show.
Which somebody in this room happens to be in it. Ms.
Thank
Lori,
you so
I'm not
much.
here because of that, but
Thank you. I'm so happy to be a part of it.
yes,
It's lovely.
and
It's
I
on Amazon.
came to her, through other friends. So yeah, it's on Amazon, and towards this treading water experience. How something comes about. And I feel like a lot of my films were people saying, oh, it's good, and there's been hurdles like being a woman, like dealing with a tough demographic. And then you just have to make these decisions that sometimes, and a lot of the things I've done has been in the niche space. And so that's what's interesting to survive as a writer. Is like, okay, the stuff that they won't touch, there are these audiences. And so most of my writing and things that I've produced have been to niche audiences. And, it's persevering. And I, did season 1, and it was a top series. It was top on Amazon, which has its new self-publishing platform, and had success, but it wasn't about millennials and blah, blah, blah. So did more, and now we're like actually have some deals coming about. So sometimes you got to believe, you got to keep at it. So it's The Other F Word. You can look for Lori. What episode are you in? But watch it all, you'll find her. She's very funny.
So my website is pretty easy. It's SusanMillerPlaywright.com. And that links to all of my work, really. You can link to my 2 web series. You can also link to information about my new play that's running right now, although I brought cards for you, and I can give you the discount code. That play is called 20th Century Blues. It's playing at the Signature Theater until the end of January. I'd love it. I'd love it if you came, and also came with the discount code. But before you leave, I have some cards up here for you to take. So again, my website is susanmillerplaywright.com. Come and visit.
All right, thank you so very much, and hope to see you all after the holidays. We're so excited to have this wonderful series. Thank you, Melissa, for creating it, for giving everyone an opportunity to express themselves in a different way. And so happy writing.